Hey everyone, welcome to the show today. We are going to be talking about supplements and performance, what female athletes need to know. And I'm super excited. We have a star on the show that is really going to be able to talk us through all of these things, Dr. Rachele Pojednic. And she has a host of experiences and things that she does. So she is the founder of Strong Process. She's the director of scientific research for Restore Labs. And then she's also the director of education for Stanford Lifestyle Medicine. She teaches sports nutrition there. She does research and health and longevity, lots of work with supplementation. So I'm going to say Dr. Rachele because it's easier. And tell us a little more about you, what you do, what your role looks like, and some of your experiences with female athletes, supplementation, sports nutrition, all the things.
Awesome, Amy. Thank you so much for having me on today. I am absolutely thrilled to be talking to a fellow sports nutrition nut. All of our, I think, alignment is just really terrific to be thinking about, especially with female athletes, because there is so much information out there that people are weeding through in order to help their performance and then potentially their longevity. So we have a lot to talk about, I think, which is exciting. So a little bit of background about me is I have kind of spread my career between academia, really traditionally and sort of classically trained in lab science, so exercise physiology, using nutrition for performance and healthy aging, as you mentioned, specifically in the supplement side. So I looked a lot at vitamin D early on in my career. I pivoted to looking at some more complementary things like CBD and more
Hot topic
recently, as you
there.
mentioned, yeah, we can talk about that. More recently, as you mentioned, I'm leading up Restore Labs. So we're looking at a lot of different micronutrients for health and longevity. And the other side of my life has been really focused on the health and wellness and fitness industry. So I am a lifelong member of the fitness industry, very proud of that and of my community on that side. And one of the things that I noticed over the last, 15, 20 years is that these two groups of people are both doing amazing work and they rarely talk to each other.
Yeah.
So we start to see all of the academics are doing all the amazing research in
Mhm.
their labs, and it ends up on PubMed and nobody's reading it. And then you have all of the coaches and the fitness and wellness folks that are in the clubs, working with athletes that are sort of left to weed through all of this information themselves. Add on to that, and we're going to be talking about women, the lack of data for girls and women in general. And we see this massive vacuum that has opened where a lot of people are just inserting information, not because they're trying to be jerks or snake oily or anything, but they're just trying to find what works for them.
Yeah.
And so I actually think it's really well intentioned,
Mhm.
but I think we got to get these two groups talking to each other. And so that's really what I try to do with my career.
I love that. So I actually came to nutrition through the fitness side as well. I taught group exercise. I loved exercise physiology. I have a degree in communications and a minor in ex phys just because I liked it. So and
Perfect.
my master's degree is in exercise and sports nutrition. So same, the combination of those two. And to your point about labs, I mean, when you look especially at sports research, the majority of it is done on healthy men age 18 to 25. And they're typically small population groups. And we know, like, as you extrapolate that, even that age group alone to female athletes, having worked in college sports like my entire career, oh my gosh, you're like, those things they don't go together. You have so many different changes for those young athletes. Obviously, on this show, we talk a lot to high school athletes, college athletes. There's so many transitions that they go through physically, hormonally, all the different things, body changes, all size, all the different things. And so, to your point, how do we tie that research together to the practical application of how we help a female athlete? Because I always tell people, like, it doesn't matter how much science you know or how much nutrition you know, if you can't make it applicable or teach someone how to put it on a plate or understand what supplements they might need, what are we really doing in that? I mean, it doesn't help us very much. And so I love that you love tying those worlds together. So let's dive into talking about supplementation, obviously we're both in the nutrition world, so we love food and food first, but there's so many different opportunities for supplementation. And when we talk about specifically even younger female athletes, what are, in your experiences, some of the nutritional considerations that might cause a female athlete to need to supplement with various vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, etc.?
Yeah, I think you're asking really good questions and you're making some really good points. So I just want to double tap on this idea of using the evidence base to guide us into utilizing a lot of these supplements and a lot of these, complementary therapies.
Mhm.
A terribly unfortunate fact is when we look at the evidence for women, particularly young women, and we look at the performance literature, whether it's exercise or utilizing supplementation, a crazy fact is that only 6% of that research is done in females alone.
It's so small. I mean, it's so
Yeah.
small.
Yeah. And
And
so
population sizes like this big.
exactly. And so when we are talking about the evidence base, unfortunately, we are often extrapolating from young male data to females. And, it gets even worse as we age, when we look at, the data on middle-aged women and in older women. And so I think we just need to caveat that really quickly is
Yeah,
that this idea that we want to be, science first and evidence-based, and we are facing a little bit of an absence of evidence problem. So when we think about women specifically, I think, you know, the first rule of supplementation is that you want to use it to fill holes, right?
right.
So
As
that
a
is,
supplement.
yes,
Like I always
exactly.
tell, like not a replacement, it's a supplement.
Exactly. The most important way that you are going to use supplements first is to make sure that you are filling any gaps that you might have from your diet. I like to think about it as an analogy of you've got to bake the cake first, right? So if you think about a cake that you have forgotten to put the salt in or the baking soda and you go and put it in the oven, that cake is going to come out looking pretty sad. And there is no amount of buttercream frosting that you can put on that cake to bake it, right? So we do want to make sure diet first and supplements in the space where you might be lacking some micronutrients or macronutrients. So I think people, when they think about supplementation, often go to these sort of like performance enhancing pills and
Yeah,
tinctures and potions. When I think about it, I first think about a multivitamin,
yeah,
right? Like, look at my diet. Am I getting all of the essential micronutrients that I need, all of the vitamins and minerals? And if I'm not, it's okay. We can start to play with our diet a little bit, but sometimes there are reasons why you
yeah,
might not be getting enough of one thing or another. And so when we look at your diet, and you can, track it for a day or two, use some kind of a fitness dietary tracker to just figure out where your holes
yeah,
are. Adding a multivitamin for me is first and foremost. And I often, with my athletes, like to think about a multivitamin first and foremost, anyways, because they're working so hard on their bodies that getting enough from diet alone can be challenging simply due to the sheer volume of
yeah,
food people need
yeah.
to be.
Especially when it comes to like female athletes who might not necessarily be taking in excessive amounts of food, whereas sometimes you'll see male athletes taking in a lot more nutrition, which ultimately provides them with more nutrients as well. But I love that you talked about filling nutrition gaps. One of the other spaces, like as a registered dietitian, when I'm talking to athletes, I'm always looking at too, are you cutting out a certain food or food group? Because if you are, I'm like, then you really have to look at what are the nutrients, the main nutrients, let's say, that food or food group provides. And to your point, are we replacing that in the diet and at its proper level so that you're getting that amount? So when we start talking about nutrition supplementation, we often start thinking about deficiencies. So I know my experience working with female athletes, we think of iron, we think potentially vitamin D. Lots of female athletes don't get enough, obviously, calcium and whatnot in their diet. But what is your experience with some of the most common deficiencies that you see in various ages of female athletes?
Yeah, you're pointing to something that I think is really important. So we can look at deficiency in two ways. Either it's showing up in your blood work, which can
Mhm.
often be challenging to get those bloods
Yeah,
done regularly. And so one of the places that I like to really look first is, are you taking in enough? And you tapped on that just a
yeah,
second, right? And so vitamin D, obviously going to be something, and I'm a little biased because I did vitamin D
Yeah.
research for so long. But we do see that getting it from the diet in adequate amounts
So
is
hard.
very challenging. Yeah. And then also, the other place that we're going to be making vitamin D in our body is through our skin.
Yeah.
And people are often, they'll go out I live in Northern California, and they'll go out in, January and February and be like, oh, I'm making my vitamin D. And I'm like, no. Actually, you're not. And this is
Right.
something I think with vitamin D people don't know is not all sun is the right sun.
Right.
So when you are outside and making your vitamin D, the wavelength of the sun is not enough to break that cholesterol bond in your skin between the
So
months of
true.
about late October to early April.
Yeah.
So in the winter months, especially, I think about
Mhm.
vitamin D for my athletes because, again, really challenging to get from the diet and you're not making it in your skin.
Yeah.
So vitamin D is a big one. The other one that doesn't come up very often, but I think is actually really important is an omega-3.
Yes.
So we
100%.
talk, in nutrition, you know this better than anybody, is we talk about the idea of essential nutrients,
Yep.
right? And so I make my students say this to me over and over and over again in class. What does essential mean? Essential in nutrition means you must eat it because you cannot make
Can't
it,
make
right?
it. Exactly. It's the
Yep.
easiest way to think about it. Yep.
And so omega-3s you can get from many different places. The predominant place where people are going to find omega-3s in the form that you want is going to be in fish, right? And not too many people eat a lot of fish. And so
Yeah.
when we do dietary intakes and we look at some of our athletes, particularly our female athletes, we find
Mhm.
that their intake of this essential omega-3 is often very low.
Yeah.
So the good thing is if you're going to supplement, 9 times out of 10, you can find a D and an omega-3 combo, right?
Yes.
So one
100%.
pill, they come together. It's wonderful because D is a fat soluble vitamin, so it's going to help with absorption as well. So this is a combo that I like to give people in especially the winter months. And
Yeah.
you can look at it even without blood work. You can probably
Yeah.
be pretty sure that people are not getting enough D and therefore
Yeah.
not getting enough omega-3s.
And especially for female athletes that play indoor sports.
Yep,
When I talk volleyball, basketball, some of those, like they're inside when the sun is the brightest, typically year round almost, maybe in the
exactly.
summer and maybe not. But yeah, I definitely hear you on that. And like I joke with most, especially young high school and college athletes, salmon, walnuts, and chia seeds really
Please.
aren't kind of making the top of the list of things to eat, so it becomes, to your point, really challenging. You do get some in milk, so I do recommend, and from a bone health perspective as well, but it's, to your point, not enough.
Yep.
So, I mean, I figure most people probably, I would say most people need vitamin D, honestly, because that we just don't get it in. And a lot of people obviously don't realize that it plays a role in athletic performance because there's a vitamin D cell receptor on like every cell in the body. So it's something that I think people hear and they're like, "Oh, that's important," especially for bone health, but they may not understand like the magnitude, let's say, of the importance. So I
It's
love
so
that you
funny that you say
bring that
that,
up.
Amy. I spent 5 years of my life trying to demonstrate that there was a vitamin D receptor on skeletal muscle.
Oh,
So that was
really?
a lot of our early work was looking at demonstrating how important vitamin D was beyond bone health. So critically important for
Yeah.
skeletal muscle.
100%. Now let's kind of talk about like health and performance. We're kind of talking between two of them, but obviously there are supplements that are specific to health. We're talking about some of the, D kind of plays in both roles. Really, so does omega-3. I guess they both do. But how do female athletes balance some of those supplements that might be important for health and then the ones that are also out there from a performance perspective?
Yeah. So I think once you bake the cake, you're sure you're getting all of the nutrients that you
Yeah.
need from whether it is a multivitamin plus diet alone, you're sure you're getting everything that you need. Then you can start to think about how to enhance performance, right? You can
Yeah.
frost the cake, if you
Yeah.
will.
I love this
So,
analogy. And then
yeah,
we're talking about cake with sports nutrition. It's a great
life must have
analogy.
joy.
Great,
Yeah,
great, great.
life must have
Yes.
joy.
Yes. Yes.
So I think there are two avenues that we can think about here.
Okay.
And this is where I start to really play with both macronutrients. So this is going to
Mhm.
be carbohydrate and protein if we're thinking about performance and recovery.
Mhm.
And then we can think about some of these other supplements, which we should tap into, things like creatine, which is getting a really,
Mhm.
really significant amount of research for the last 10 years or so,
Yeah.
particularly in females. This data is starting to emerge. And so I think there are two ways that you can think about performance supplementation. The one is going to be in the moment right now when you are playing your sport, when you're practicing during a game, during some kind of an event. And, you know, the most important thing that we want to make sure that people have on board is fuel, right?
Right.
And the fuel that is going to be so important specifically for our muscles and especially for intense efforts like sprinting is going to be carbohydrates,
Yep.
right? And so we think about supplementation again as pills oftentimes, but
Mm,
supplementation during your event could be some kind of a carbohydrate source like a drink, a sports drink that has some sugar in it. It could be a goo or a gel or these little gummies that you can
yeah.
have now, the chews. Because what we see oftentimes with female athletes is they don't realize that they're running out of gas.
Low
And
on
so,
energy. Low
yeah,
on energy. Yeah.
exactly. And so using those carbohydrate supplements, these products that, on any given Tuesday, would I want you necessarily downing a bunch of carbohydrate gummies at lunchtime?
Right.
No, but I really want you to use those during
Yeah.
your performance. So that's something. Conversely, is going to be protein. As
Yeah.
we talked about, we want to get diet first. But protein is incredibly satiating. It makes you feel very
Mhm.
full. And when you look at protein dietary sources, they're often large, right? So if you
Yeah.
think about chicken and steak, or even some of the beans that we're using, the legumes from a vegetarian perspective,
Mhm.
they can make you feel really full. So
Yeah.
oftentimes, from a volume perspective, it's really challenging for athletes to get enough protein
Yep.
to rebuild their muscles, to rebuild their bone, to make sure that they've got enough of the building blocks around for their immune system. And so this is another space that I think about supplementation often is protein bars and
Yep.
shakes are terrific, especially for female athletes, especially if you're on the go.
I was like,
So,
convenience is key because a lot of
yeah.
times it's most proteins have to be kept hot or cold. There's a few
Yep.
that don't. Beef
Yep.
jerky, turkey jerky bars, but I find that to be one of the most challenging is like what's the most convenient way that you can get in that protein often and then when you need it like post workout. Lots of kids are leaving practice and they don't have access to some of those things. So totally agree with you there.
Yep. So I love using a protein supplement. It's a
Mhm.
bar, it's a protein shake. It is some of these high protein milk
Yeah.
drinks are really terrific as well.
Yes.
They taste really yummy, which is really great,
Yum.
especially if you've
Yes.
got, teenage girls that are like in the back of the SUV or the minivan. Like just throw them back
Yeah.
one of these, bottles of really yummy chocolate milk and you can get somewhere between 20 and 40 grams of
Yeah.
protein on board really easily.
And they're
So
easy to find.
super easy.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can get them at the grocery store. You can
Yep.
get them at most
Convenience
convenience store.
stores.
You
Yeah,
got it. Thanks.
exactly. Yeah,
Um,
exactly, exactly. It's like we planned this before.
yep. So that's where I think about, the first place that we
Yeah,
want to be using supplements is during performance and for recovery. Carbohydrates for performance, protein for recovery. And then we can start to think about some of the more fun stuff, right?
yeah.
So these typically are the products that get the most headlines, they get the most buzz,
Mhm.
because they do show some pretty cool performance
Yeah,
enhancing outcomes. So as I mentioned just a second ago, creatine is getting a lot of buzz and hype right now, and I would say for good reason.
yeah.
So, you know this, creatine is probably the most studied supplement on the
Yeah,
face of the
definitely is.
performance,
Mhm.
literature. But it's been mostly in men,
Yep.
as we talked about early on. This was the when I was back in, my early days of being a strength coach, and this was the like beefcake
Yeah,
supplement, right? It's like all
100%.
the bodybuilders were in taking their creatine powders and was making a
Yep.
mess for the floor in the gym. Now they come in different forms, so you can still
Yep.
get it in powder. They have really great gummy forms that are
Yeah.
coming that are really easy to sort of pack around. They have
Yep.
a little bit less GI distress issues. But what we're seeing with creatine is because of the sort of history of it, it was always this supplement, and this is the way that it works, that builds
Right.
up your muscle, right?
Yeah.
So if you look at a bodybuilder, a dude trying to make his muscles bigger and he's taking
Right.
creatine, it'll get bigger because
Yeah.
it helps you to lift
Right.
heavier,
Heavier.
right?
Yeah.
So that was kind of the only mechanism that was looked at for a
Hmm.
really long time. And as it turns out, not only do your muscles use phosphocreatine to help regenerate ATP
Right.
really quickly, another very important organ does as well, and that's your brain. You got it. You got it. And so, what we're seeing, especially in the female literature, is that it can really help with performance, especially explosive
Yep.
performance. But when we're looking at the data that's coming out in midlife and a little bit beyond, we're also seeing some really powerful outcomes for things like
Cognition
cognition,
health.
brain
Yeah.
fog, all these issues that you start to sort of come across a little bit
Yeah.
later in life. And the good thing is with this supplement, it's been studied in so many ways, in so many
Mhm.
different people. We know it's very safe.
Yeah. Well,
So
and
that
I have to ask you. So a few months ago, I did a podcast with the founder and inventor of creatine hydrochloride of concrete. So, because obviously you're referencing creatine monohydrate, that's what we think of. And I am so into creatine hydrochloride because of it's 7 times more concentrated and because the bioavailability is so much higher. You get some of the strength gains. There's a lot of research on the cognitive part as well as immunity, but without that extra weight gain, which is what a lot of women really pull back on creatine for. So in this situation, it's like you can get those strength gains, but you're not getting that bloating, water retention, etc. So I think it's probably one of the hottest things out there. Most people don't know about it. But when you listen to, I mean, I talked to Mark, he's the founder of it, for like an hour after we did the podcast. I was like, and I already knew about it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is the most interesting information because it's not out there. And for female athletes specifically, I think it has a lot of warrant for strength, like you're saying, performance, but as well as the cognitive benefits and the immunity benefits, how it strengthens T cells. I mean, it's just an amazing. I think the more and more we learn, the more and more we're going to be like, everyone should be taking creatine. I have my parents on it now. My mom was like, how do I get this stuff as fast as possible?
Yeah, no, it's so great. I am the same. I'm like it's
Yeah.
the supplement of the moment, but for
Yeah.
good reason. I
Yep.
think
100%.
it's really one of those things that anybody can take and see benefit from.
Yep.
And I like that you pointed out that there are a couple different versions.
Mhm.
One thing with creatine, as well as other supplements, is that the same molecule might have differing effects on
Yeah.
different individuals.
Yes.
So, like I said, with the powder, in some people, it can cause some GI distress. It can cause a little
Mhm.
bit of a bloating feeling. A gummy might be a good idea for you. Creatine monohydrate is one version, that creatine hydrochloride is the other. So you might have to sort of like
Yeah.
mess with the products a little bit here and there to find the
Mhm.
one that works for you. At
Yep.
the end of the day, whichever one works for you makes you feel great without GI distress, potentially without some of these water weight
Yeah.
gain issues.
Yeah.
It'll be doing great things for your body.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. But yeah, I think men and women, it's always been a men's supplement. I feel like
Mhm.
maybe some women, but yeah. Now, as we kind of transition, we talked health, we talked performance. Let's talk about hormonal scenarios because with female athletes, especially age, what, 10, let's probably say even more, up until, I mean, even in college, I feel like I could pick it up at like 18, 21, 22. I mean, like there's just so many stages and it happens at different ages for female athletes. But how does hormonal fluctuations, menstrual cycles, energy availability, all of those things that are kind of like I would say a moving variable for many athletes. How does that affect supplementation and where do you see oftentimes that female athletes might need to supplement specifically?
Yeah, such a great question. So, puberty is going to happen for women at different levels, typically,
Yep.
as you mentioned, somewhere between, 10 and 13 or
Yeah.
so, with a standard deviation on each side.
Mhm.
And then you're going to end up for the next, 30 years, 40 years of your life with hopefully a fairly regular menstrual
Yeah.
cycle as you go through time. And then you hit peri and the menopausal transition, and then all of a sudden you have another massive transition
Yeah.
in your mostly estrogen and progestin, testosterone hormones. So we see that there are these really critical time points that are
Yeah.
going to cause these dramatic physiologic changes
Right.
due to these very powerful hormones in the female body. And this is where I get very excited right now because even though the data is a little bit dire on the, 6% of women, we see
Yeah.
finally that people are recognizing that it's really important to understand and
Yeah.
study these fluctuations because they're super unique to the female body, right?
Hmm.
And so when we start to think about these different transitions, there's a lot of hype around what is going on from a nutrition and a supplementation standpoint throughout the lifespan. So if you were to, just Google menstrual cycle and performance, like the stuff that's going to come up, or you're
Oh,
probably being advertised to
yeah.
on your social media platforms or, through your feeds. I will say, unfortunately, we don't have a significant amount of data on how we should be altering supplementation and nutrition around the menstrual
Wow.
cycle, number one, and then around the menopausal transition, number two. But we do have some interesting and fun new clues. And the data is actually, I think, becoming like more and more boring, which is pretty exciting because it takes the
Yeah.
pressure off trying to figure out how to time everything
Yeah.
perfectly.
I love that.
So, when we think specifically about the menstrual cycle, so if we're thinking about younger athletes,
Mhm.
teenagers, middle college up to, let's call it, early masters athletes in their mid 30s, early 40s, you're going to have this, what is typically a 28-day cycle, although it's going to be 28 days for one woman and
Yep.
21 days for another and 32 for another. And then month to month for you,
Yeah.
it might be 28 this month and 27 next month. So everybody's like, oh, you should be cycle syncing and like you should be training against your cycle and you should be using nutrition against your cycle. And what we're finding in the actual data is you might feel different cycle to cycle or phase to phase within each cycle, but at the end of the day, this is very exciting. It doesn't seem to change
Really?
strength gains. It doesn't
Oh,
seem to
fantastic.
change, yeah, your, performance
Yeah.
outcomes. You might not feel great in your luteal phase. Like you might have some
Right.
cramps and you might be a little
Right.
bit grumpy. But the good thing is that you can train really hard
Yeah.
and you can keep your nutrition pretty consistent, cycle to cycle and phase to
Yeah.
phase. So that's very exciting. Um, that being said, if you are a menstruating female, you're a menstruating girl or a woman, there are some things that you want to pay attention to, right? So iron is going to be a really important factor here. If you are menstruating and you're losing iron through that menstrual blood, you might end up with a either acute or maybe even long-term
Mhm.
iron deficiency. But here's the thing with iron deficiency. You don't just want to start like pounding iron pills, right? Because you're like, oh, I have a heavy cycle or I don't. This is one you actually really want to go get a blood
Yes.
test
Get a
for.
lab work done. Like, do
Yeah,
not just start taking iron for fun. If it's in like your
exactly.
multivitamin, fine, the little bit that's in there. But yes, do not take iron for fun because of some of it's GI. Oh gosh, all the things.
It can cause all kinds of issues. And
Yeah.
we often think in our sort of like capitalistic world, if a little is good, a lot is better. And that is the worst thing you can think
Not
about
the
with
case with iron.
supplementation. And
Yeah.
iron is a really good example of that, right? So go get your blood tested, see what your different there are several different ways that you're going to measure iron in the blood. Your doctor can
Right.
explain this to you, as well as certain anemias that are going to be
Yeah.
related to low iron. Anemia can also be related to low B12 as well. And
I've
so,
had these problems personally, so this is why I shake my head and talk to you because
yeah.
yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah, so these two things I think go hand in hand, and this is completely independent of psyching to our cycle, or
Yeah.
psyching to our cycle. Let me try.
Ah, that I like
Syncing,
the way you said that though,
yeah,
sinking to our cycle.
syncing to our cycle. This is just, common sense, right? So we
Yeah.
want to just make sure that we're getting our labs done and we know that we've got these micronutrients on board. So two that
Yeah.
we want to add to the list of things to pay attention to for our female
Yep.
athletes, iron, as well as B12 and paying
Yep.
attention to anemias. The other, if we look at sort of
Can I
like the,
chime in actually
yes,
too for all the parents out there besides iron, ferritin, especially if
yes,
you have an endurance athlete, because a doctor, even a pediatrician, they will not typically run a ferritin. And
yes.
you'll watch girls' iron levels look normal and their ferritin's like at the bottom rung. And we miss it. I think we often miss it too late, per se. And I know, like in college sports, when I worked at TCU, we started ferritin testing our cross country athletes, our swimmers, the females, 3 times a year just
Yes.
to test it and make sure. So ferritin for all the people out there is stored iron in the blood and you will deplete that first to keep your iron levels stable. And so you'll start to see oftentimes some of those negative effects, I feel like, of fatigue and just overall, like, oh my gosh, I don't have enough energy from ferritin, when ferritin is getting low. So just if you're at the doctor with your young daughter, especially, really even college, all of them, have them run a ferritin test because they will not run that on their own.
Yep, 100%. And I will tap in a little bit further is
Yeah.
lean more toward a vegetarian or a vegan diet.
Yeah.
Always really good
100%.
to get it tested. You can
Yep.
be perfectly iron and ferritin normal. And there are some other iron derivatives that you probably want to pay
Yeah.
attention to as well, but with a vegan or a vegetarian diet. But that's just going to be a little bit more of a risk factor because you're
Yeah.
not getting that heme iron that is so readily
Yes.
available. So all good things to pay attention
Yep.
to and to make
100%.
sure that you get your labs done.
Yes. Awesome. No, thank you for that. I just wanted to clarify because so many parents, I think, they don't know. No one
Yeah,
ever told them. And then oftentimes they're seeing a physician, they're running an iron and they're not, or then they start giving, to your point, female athletes iron. And I'm like, and please give them vitamin C and please give them an over the counter stool softener because most physicians don't tell. I mean, some probably do, but I have found that I've got runners and now they're nauseous, they're constipated. I mean, we just have a lot of issues. So iron, to your point, is one of those like get your labs drawn. Probably work with a registered dietitian if you can, a sports
definitely.
dietitian, because I mean, like I've had parents go, we've never been told to take vitamin C with iron, or we've never been told to take like a Colace or just a very basic stool softener. And now they've got their poor runners that are constipated, their stomach hurts, they feel nauseous, and it's kind of like a hot mess.
Yep,
So,
totally. A hundred
so,
percent. I love that you tapped into the vitamin C there too, because
yeah,
this could be a whole nother podcast of like
just
what
on those
supplements go together and which ones don't.
don't,
And
yes,
so, we want to be careful about that as well, which is why I like a multivitamin is it's
yeah,
kind of doses that your body is able to bring
all
in,
at one
use,
time.
and transport to the tissues without having this either competing effect or, as you're mentioning, that it's usually in a space where the enhancing is also happening. So if you
Yeah,
think about multi with vitamin C and iron, vitamin C is going to help bring that iron in and make it
iron.
more
Yep.
usable. And so, yeah, we want to be paying attention to those complementary and sometimes competing
So I'm going to
nutrients.
lead into a competing one right now. So one of the other things with female athletes that we often deal with is bone health. So obviously we know that girls lay down about 90% of their bone by age 17, 18-ish. And so we're looking at calcium, vitamin D, calcium and iron, no goes together. We don't want you taking those together. And so talk a little bit about supplementation. We've already talked about the vitamin D, but I find even girls that will consume dairy foods, I always tell my dietitians that work for me, like, will consume and do consume are not always the same thing. Like, if you ask me, I would tell you I love scrambled eggs with all my heart. But if you ask me how often I eat them when I go to hotels or restaurants.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I travel a lot, so that's a decent amount. But I'll hear girls say, "Oh yeah, I like yogurt," or "Oh, I like milk," but then they're not consuming it regularly. And so, like and consume are different. So, talk a little bit about the supplements. Obviously, we know calcium citrate, vitamin D, but the importance of that as it relates, especially to that growth and development phase for female athletes.
I think you just hit something that is so important to talk about. And you talk about a fact that most women don't know is that your peak bone mass is
Yep.
in your late teens and early
Yep.
20s. And the unfortunate fact about that is from then on, it's pretty much a preservation game,
Yes,
right?
exactly.
So it is almost impossible to
Mhm.
rebuild bone later on in life, especially after an osteopenia or
Yep.
an osteoporosis diagnosis. There are some drugs that you can take. There's potentially hormones that you can use in that sort of like
Mhm.
peri-postmenopausal time. But I would say by then, we're already in a real
Too
pickle
late.
with our
Yeah.
bones. Yeah. So this is something that I talk to my young females and their parents
Parents.
about
Yeah.
all the time
Mhm.
is this is the moment.
Yeah.
Now is the time to
Now is it because like you basically get a chance. I mean, like I'd say, growing to age 30. But for females, I mean, by early 20s, I mean, they're oftentimes maybe a late bloomer, but most of them are tapped out with, I mean, their bone mineral density is what it is.
Yep.
And I'm like, you don't understand. Like, you have to pay attention to this. And I used to always joke that like dairy is like the one food that female athletes often go to college without. They might have had milk at home or they might have had more of it there, but they just oftentimes don't. The revitalization of chocolate milk for recovery, I do think helps. But to your point, and we talked about the higher protein milks, which often are ultra filtered, which are higher in calcium. But I totally interrupt you. But yeah, they just miss the importance of that age and getting it
That
in.
age. It's so huge.
Yeah.
And with the advent of all of these milk alternatives as
Yes.
well, some of them are well fortified, but not all. And even if they're fortified, it's with one ingredient or another.
Yeah.
Milk is really one of the best ways that you can get it.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I'll tap into right now, and this goes into low energy availability and the risk of
Yep.
things like, changing up and messing with your menstrual cycle as well as bone health, is this is a time period for many women and athletes are not immune to this, where they're seeing around the world around them that they're being socialized to be smaller
Yeah.
and they start eating less food,
Yeah.
which overall is going to be very problematic. But when we look at
Mhm.
the literature, not only is it problematic for things like performance and overall health, but it takes a massive toll on bone and the long-term health of
Mhm.
that bone tissue itself. We I partnered with a couple of physicians that were looking at mostly college-aged women and mostly runners.
Yeah.
And what they found was in a vast majority, so well over 50%, these young women aged 18 to 24-year-old were already exhibiting signs of osteoporosis. And so if we start with osteoporosis in our late
Yeah.
teens, early 20s, it is going to be a real
Yeah.
problem later on in life. And so I like to sort of like be a little bit emphatic about
Yeah.
this topic. And always when I present it to the young women and their parents, like their eyes get big
Yeah.
because they don't realize that this is such a
Mhm.
critical time period to make sure that we are getting the nutrients on board that we need. So, what are the nutrients? There's three
Right.
major ones that we know, right? So, the first is going to be vitamin D, the second is going to be calcium. The vitamin D is going to bring the calcium in so that your bone can become calcified. The third is going to be protein. So, a
Yeah.
lot of people don't realize how critically important getting
Yeah.
adequate protein is for bone building. And then the last that I would say that's kind of coming on pretty strong, which is interesting, is vitamin K. Um,
Ah.
yeah, so we know that K, I get a lot of questions about this. Oh, if I take K with D, does it help the D absorption? No, that's not what K is
Yeah.
doing.
No.
K is actually really important for bone remodeling. So those osteoclasts and
Yeah.
osteoblasts,
Blast.
if you were paying attention in anatomy class,
Yeah. All
um,
the non-science people are like, what are y'all talking about?
yeah,
They're
this
things
is
that make bone and rebuild bone, basically.
exactly,
Break down,
exactly.
rebuild.
So that's something that's really cool about
Very
bone.
interesting.
It's constantly turning itself over, which is
Yep.
exciting. K is the helper to help turn that bone over
Yeah.
and make sure that that bone is hardened appropriately. So I would say those three things,
Yeah.
the micronutrients of D, calcium, and K, and then protein as a macronutrient are really important. But I think here's the thing, people's heads start to spin when we, start like
Yeah.
dropping all these letters and names.
Yep.
If you think about it in team, if you were to sort of like rewind this podcast and listen to it again, it's kind of all the same stuff that's doing really important things for our
Yes.
body.
Exactly.
So
Yes.
we keep repeating the same vitamins and minerals and macronutrients. And if you're getting adequate amounts of these essentials, then you're going to
Yeah.
be all right.
Well, and I always tell, especially athletes that may not get enough dairy. So typically we're wanting at least 3 servings, ideally, of milk a day. But that could be in chocolate milk, that could be in smoothie, that could be a lot of different ways that you could be incorporating it. But I always tell athletes, if you do not get that in, you have to take calcium citrate and vitamin D. And then ding, 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 it needs to be calcium citrate. A lot of times people will go, oh, that one has so much calcium, and it's calcium carbonate. And I'm like, not effective, not effective. The absorption rate is so much lower. So there's very few that I'm like, if this, then that. I'm like, if you don't consume dairy, you have got to take calcium and vitamin D. I mean, just kind of end of the story. Same thing. You don't eat omega 3, you don't eat salmon and walnut. Okay, you have got to take omega 3s because to your point, they are essentials that are doing things that cannot be done by the body on its own. So, parents out there, it's calcium citrate, vitamin D, and you can typically buy them, like you said, with D and omega 3s. You can also buy a calcium citrate and D together for sure.
Yep.
So yeah, those are my few. And you'll find different ones like that are not big horse pills, like or even like the little chews. But I will say one thing that's really important is some of these ultra filtered milks, they do filter the calcium higher. And
Yep.
so like I was drinking a Core Power one day and I mean it's 50% of my daily calcium
Yeah.
needs. And I'm like, that's fantastic as long as you've got some vitamin D in there with it, which it has in there as well. Going to be key. Okay, so as we close out, let's talk about safety and trends. So, safety, obviously, in the world of sports, specifically having worked in college and professional sports for a long, long time, pee wee to pro, I like to say. But we're always talking about safety from a third party tested, specifically NSF certified for sport, and then informed choice, informed sport. So, both, I'd love to hear your input from the safety side and then also trends that athletes, like female athletes, might need to stay away from. As you said at the very beginning, there's lots of things marketed to them. So, what should they like? I mean, my recommendation is always not just because I am one, but meet with a sports dietitian. They know what they're talking about. They can help you dive in on, do you need a supplement? Do you not? Are you getting this? Are you not? But I'd love to hear safety, trends.
Yes. Okay, so safety, I think you tapped on it, super important. So NSF certified, NSF for
Mhm.
sports certified. You can go to their website, you can
Yep.
run your product through to make sure that it is safe. There is, and I always, dropping science data is my love language, so excuse me, but
I
there's
love
some
it.
really devastating data that shows that upwards of somewhere between, depending on the study that you look at, somewhere between 30 and 60% of supplements that are marketed directly to athletes are either adulterated, which means that there's stuff in there that shouldn't be, or what is on the label isn't actually in the bottle. Yeah.
Yep.
And so this is problematic for two reasons. So, number one, let's say you are an athlete that gets drug tested. If there's some
Mhm.
kind of an anabolic product in there or ingredient or something that is not safe for you, you want to make sure that that's not in there, which is what the NSF third party testing will do.
Mhm.
The other is if you buy a supplement and it says 1,000 IUs of vitamin D on it, you want to make sure that there's 1,000
Yeah.
IUs in every pill that you're taking,
Yes.
right? And so this really is important to make sure that you're getting what you think you're getting on
Yeah.
one hand, and that you're not getting ingredients that either you don't want or could be detrimental to your career if
Yep.
it's you're tested and you test positive for one of the banned substances.
Mhm.
So super important there for the testing. And then I would just say make sure that you are buying from reputable places. There is a lot of supplement companies out there that are going to advertise to you on your social media, that are going to pop up. You're looking for a vitamin D supplement and you're like, oh, this is a little bit expensive. And you go noodling around on Amazon and you're like, oh, this one's cheap.
Yeah.
You know,
Probably
make
a
sure.
reason for that. There's probably a
Exactly,
reason for that.
exactly,
Mhm.
exactly. So I would say buy from sources that you feel really
Yeah.
comfortable with. Um, the other thing that I think is just really important here is, and it taps into this idea of supplements don't need to be super expensive.
Yeah.
So the dirty little secret of the supplement industry is that there's only a handful of ingredient makers around the world.
Yeah.
So most of them are in India and China, which is not a problem. For the most part, they're pretty safe. But if you are looking for a product, for example, that's like, we're in the United States, made in the USA, that doesn't mean the ingredients are made in the USA. It means they are transported here and put into a pot, a bottle or a pill or a potion or a tincture at a formulator here.
Yeah.
And so there are a lot of companies out there that will advertise to you, like $60 for a bottle of multivitamins. And
Yeah.
I'm like, the like $10 Centrum that you can get at,
Right.
Walmart, CVS is exactly the same ingredients
Yeah.
with a much less shiny label. And something like, a Centrum or one of these, I have no affiliation with this company, but they're
Yeah.
owned by GlaxoSmithKline, which is a pharmaceutical company with
Yeah.
a spotlight on them. So be
Right.
really careful about these small label makers. They
Yeah.
might sound like really appealing, and just because they're more expensive doesn't mean that they are sourced differently or they're formulated differently. So
Yeah.
be really thoughtful about that before you drop a ton of money on really expensive supplements, which kind of goes to things to beware of and
Yeah.
headline types. So I think the first headline and hype that I would want to be careful about, and I talked about this just a moment ago, is just because a little is good doesn't mean a lot is better. So one of the products that's on the market that's very popular right now are all of these greens products,
Yep.
right? And if you look at the greens products and you flip them over, you're going to see 12,000% of this or 1,000% of
Yeah.
that or even 500% of these ingredients. And at first blush, you would say, oh, this sounds great. I can get all of my vegetables. I can get
Yeah.
all of my
Everything I
ingredients,
need. Yeah.
everything I need in one powder in the morning. Be really skeptical of that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of hype and headlines around these kinds of super concentrated products. When we look at the literature and the data on especially micronutrients, so vitamins and minerals, there's a sweet spot
Yep.
of just enough, not too little and not too much,
Yep.
right? And not too much can be just as detrimental to your system
Yep.
as not enough. So we want to be really careful about turning those, powders and
Yeah.
pills and potions and tinctures over. 100% of your daily value is great. Like that's what
Yeah.
you
You don't need
want.
10,000%.
No, you don't.
Same.
Yeah, so I would be really careful about that. And the other one that I see oftentimes, and this is getting
Mhm.
really popular, and it goes to these greens powders as well, is this claim of anti-inflammation and recovery. And
Yeah.
so when we look at a lot of these supplements that are super, super high dose, and they're saying, oh, it's going to really help with your inflammation, we have to remember that exercise is supposed to acutely
Yeah.
induce inflammation, right? So
Yeah.
I'm a muscle researcher. And when I look at muscle and it's just been worked out, you've done a resistance training, you've, gone to practice, you've just had a game, your muscle is inflamed for a
Yeah.
short period of time. And the reason for that is it's sending a signal to your immune system, hey, I'm damaged, come and fix me.
Yep.
If you take these super, super high doses beyond the fact that you just don't need that much and they could potentially be detrimental
Mhm.
from a safety perspective, what we're seeing play out in the literature is that it's also blunting that signal from your muscle to your
Mhm.
immune system. And so if you stop that communication between these two systems because you've wiped out all the inflammation in your body, what we're seeing is not only are your gains impaired, but we're also seeing real problems with overall recovery. And if we take it out
Mhm.
one step further and look at a lot of these anti-inflammatory medications, things like ibuprofen,
Mhm.
the NSAIDs, what we see, especially in athletes and particularly in female runners, are things like bone stress injuries and soft tissue
Yeah.
injuries because your body is not repairing itself in the way that it's supposed to. So be very wary of
Yeah.
super high doses, and especially if they're making claims of, massive anti-inflammation. That's actually not good for your body, even though intuitively you're like, I don't want to be sore. I don't want my
Yeah.
body to be inflamed. Let your body recover after these really intense efforts. It will come back stronger if
Yeah.
you let it do its thing.
I love that. It's like someone the other day, I've never been this psycho like hand sanitizer person. Like, it's just not my jam. And I travel a lot and I really don't get, thank you, God, do not get sick that often. And I was like, I'll actually take some germs because they make your immune system stronger. Like
Yeah.
if you're constantly getting rid of all the germs when you encounter one, I'm like, okay with some germs, like because then I'm gonna wash my hands. But you'll see people that every 5 seconds are like disinfecting something. I'm like, sometimes a little germs help, sometimes a little bit of inflammation. I always tell people like it's chronic inflammation with bad things that you don't want. So no, it's a great point because so many people don't know that.
Yep. Yep.
They really don't. And I think that you have made just so many fantastic points. People are going to have to go re-listen to this because they're going to need to take notes. We need to supply notes in the show notes. But I think
What's the right supplement stack in the show notes? We'll put it in.
right. I think the take home message too is though, like when you're eating a balanced diet and incorporating various food groups, you're going to do a good job of getting nutrients. However, depending on how much you train, those some of those essential nutrients. Sometimes people get some of those nutrients and not enough. You drink 1 glass of milk a day, it's fantastic. That's not enough for your calcium and vitamin D. So I definitely think it's taking what you said at the very beginning, a really nutrient-rich diet, supplementing where necessary, but doing an evaluation to see where you might need to supplement. And for some athletes, that could look different at different times of the year as well.
Totally. Yeah, different training periods, different,
Yeah,
if it's sick or if it's winter or if it's
yeah,
summer, what you're eating. Totally. I would say,
totally.
keep a continuous eye on it for sure.
Nope, I love that. I am so appreciative to you for coming on today. So, if people want to find out more about you, your research, and all the different things, where can we send them? And then we'll put it in the show notes as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I try to be good on social media with science communication.
Love it.
You can find me on the socials at Rachele Pojednic. It's kind of a funny spelling, so you probably want to check the show notes.
Yes.
You can also find me on my website, rachelepojednic.com, if you want to learn more about nutrition and performance. I have a suite of courses on
Awesome.
strongprocess.com, so you can access those. They're accredited for personal trainers and health coaches. And also just feel free to reach out, like send me a DM. I love communicating and talking with people, especially in
Fantastic.
this space, clearing out all of the hype and headlines that we are constantly
Yes.
having to weed through.
Yes. Well, awesome. Thank you so much for all your time. And we'll drop all your contact info in the show notes.
Amazing, Amy. Have a beautiful day, and thank you so much for having me on.